18th century, one of the greatest composers of the age formed a unique creative relationship with a group of women that lasted for 36 years. The composer was Father Antonio Vivaldi. The female singers and instrumentalists were all figlie, or daughters of an ancient Venetian institution known as La Pietà, or the Mercy, a home for abandoned children.
Our choir from Oxford is here in Venice with an all-female orchestra to take part in the research into this little understood musical relationship.
The purpose of our trip to Venice is to help road test new discoveries about the Pietà. We're recording some of Vivaldi's great sacred music using only women's voices. This is the style in which Vivaldi meant it to be heard, but which has been treated with disbelief by musicologists for over 200 years.
Top a semitone, take a breath.
Our inspiration and the woman behind this research is Micky White.
I want to give you a very, very special welcome. Special welcome to those who have been before, and a special welcome to those who have never been here before. We are pioneers in Vivaldi's music. All of you represent the musicians of the Pietà, and they came in as babies, and most of them stayed all their lives, and there was a very, very special relationship between Vivaldi and these women. What he understood was their position, because all of you were dumped, that you were all unwanted, and when you're unwanted, you're more vulnerable, you're more sensitive, and he understood that, and that's why he wrote in the way that he wrote. So he gave all of you a chance to star, and that's the important thing about Vivaldi's music written for the Pietà.
Everybody visiting Venice comes here to St Mark's Square, although for some reason today there are a lot fewer tourists than normal.
In the 18th century, wealthy travellers, mostly men, came from all over Europe to this strange, mythical floating city to enjoy a combination of culture and sex. Venice in those days had a well-deserved reputation for licentious behaviour, and in fact St Mark's Square was a pimp's paradise.
Inevitably, this sex industry had social consequences. There was a relentless flood of unwanted babies, some of whom were severely blighted by deformities caused by syphilis. And tragically, it was not unknown for some infants to end up being dropped discreetly in the canal.
Fortunately, there was an alternative open to any woman who, for whatever reason, was unable to take care of her newborn child. Since the Middle Ages, Venice had developed a group of 4 great institutions, or ospedale, which formed a charitable welfare system for the city.
This is the oldest of the 4 institutions, the Mendicanti, Amazingly, it is still the main hospital in Venice today. It was founded in the 12th century for beggars, lepers and the destitute. Another hospital was set up for famine victims and another for sufferers from syphilis and incurable diseases. The fourth ospedale, the Pietà, was established as a home for abandoned children in the 14th century. Elsie Arnold is a Venetian historian and a friend of Micky White's who lives in Oxford.
So can you tell us, what were the ospedali and what was their role?
The role was they were hospitals. They were everything. They were orphanages, schools, hospitals, old people's homes. They looked after you when you died, and they were very worthy organisations. And I think it was almost by accident that music came to a fore when they discovered, and I'm sure it's partly to do with the Grand Tour, they realised that these foreigners liked listening to good music, especially during Lent when the opera houses were closed.
In the early 1700s, after a heavy bout of debauchery, the wealthy tourists came to the great churches of the city to ease their guilt and listen to some of the finest music in Europe. For the congregation listening in the body of the church, there was the added frisson that the women singing in the galleries high above them were hidden from view behind metal grilles. This allowed the audience only an opaque silhouette of the choir producing the heavenly sounds.
They sing like angels, and I swear there is nothing more diverting than the sight of a young and pretty woman with a bunch of pomegranate blossoms over her ear, conducting the orchestra with all the grace imaginable.
This afternoon I went again to the Pietà. There was not much company, and the girls played 1,000 tricks in singing, particularly in the duets, where there was a trial of skill and of natural powers, as who could go highest, lowest, swell a note the longest, or run divisions with the greatest rapidity. At the hospitals and churches, where it's not allowed to applaud in the same manner as at the opera, they cough, hem, and blow their noses to express admiration.
I can conceive of nothing as voluptuous or as moving as this music. What grieves me are those accursed grills, which allow only notes to pass through and conceal the angels of loveliness. As I listen, I feel a tremor of love such as I have never experienced before. Who were these extraordinary musicians behind the grills? On the one hand, objects of erotic fantasy.
On the other hand, a sad and motley collection of the deformed and the disfigured. We know that some of the women were born with disabilities due to syphilis contracted by their mothers, and others were permanently scarred by ringworm or smallpox.
In 1738, at the end of Vivaldi's time working here at the hospital known as the Pietà, there were over 1,000 women belonging to the community. The Pietà still has an important role in the regional welfare system as a home for children from troubled families. Anna Maria Giannuzzi Miraglia, the president of the Pietà, has played a large role in modernising the institution, but places great importance on the Pietà heritage.
What was life in the Pietà like? The little boys and girls were educated. There were very many of them. Girls were taught crafts, embroidery or similar things. Boys were oriented towards a trade. These boys and girls had a journey that could take them either inside or outside of the institute. Often they were sent out of the city into our countryside, where families adopted them. Still today, if you were to go to some parts of our land, you would find written Road of the Abandoned, because they were the areas where the Pietà had big properties that were used for the upkeep of the children. In Vivaldi's period, the Pietà girls, the so-called figlie di coro, played instruments and sang. Some of them became very important and renowned throughout the whole of Europe. Some maestri or teachers wrote music for them. Vivaldi was one of the most important maestri of the Pietà. He taught them music. He taught them how to play various instruments, and he composed music for them.
Ha composto musica per loro.
When you first meet Micky, you can't help wondering how she ended up living in Venice, working on this historical research.
I'm naturally a photographer. I came to Venice with my 2 cats. There was this pull to come here, but I didn't know why. When I read about Vivaldi, it wasn't like reading a book. It was like meeting a person. I wanted to know some more because what I read in the books didn't quite fit. I got this nagging feeling that I want to do some research. I put that out of my mind as quick as it came in because I thought, well, I've never been to an archive in your life. You're not a musician, you're not an archivist, and you're not an intellectual. But the idea kept on coming back. The first thing I've got to do is understand the Pietà. What was the Pietà? What went on there? And what did he do there? Because you've got to put him into context. Now, we're in the courtyard of the original Pietà. This is the first Pietà, and nobody knows this. It was founded in 1346 by Pietro di Assisi, a Franciscan monk, who was so disgusted at seeing all the children lying in the road that he founded this little house here. This is the actual building, which still stands today. And this must date from about 1200 or 1300. Lei è collegata con questa casetta qui. Si può venire a vedere.
Dentro?
Sì. Sei un meraviglia. Si entra di qui. Questa porta qui. I was so excited. I'd never been inside the little Pietà before. I wasn't even sure if anyone lived there. No, guarda che bello. Oh, favoloso. Ha una siamese. No, guarda, siamo proprio... Ecco, we are in the original Pietà. Because we are... That's it.
Scusate per il casino.
We're in it. No, no.
Appena svegliato adesso.
Fantastic. This is a historic moment. Just see how small it is. It's minute. Allora, questo è molto significato. Tu ce l'hai 10 gatti e quando questo frate era il fondatore della Pietà, lui aveva 10 bambini. By the time the Pietà was established on its present-day site, one of the most important features was the scaffetta. Originally, it was a hole in the wall, and later a revolving door where abandoned babies could be left. The scaffetta's gone, but they've still got the stern plaque threatening damnation and excommunication on anyone who abandons a child while they still have the means of raising the infant. The small museum inside the Pietà tells the story of what happened to the babies once they were posted through the hole. And this is where it all begins. This is where all the children were registered. And the clothes that they wore are described, you see. So Faustina was a newborn, nascente is newborn, and she came almost dressed in rags. The hour is registered as well, so she came in 1 hour after sunset. Now, as it's January, it would have been about 5 o'clock in the afternoon. If you think average of 4 a day were pushed in the scaffetta, multiply that by 365, you can't.
No.
Now, here, this P here, this is the mark with which they were branded, and they were branded on the upper left arm. And so as soon as they'd come in, they were brought in by the portinara, who would receive them after being shoved in the hole. She would then call the surgeon, and he would brand them with this P.
Like a hop.
Exactly. Sometimes a mother would leave half a token. She'd cut it in half. Now, if she wanted to claim the baby back again, she could. And this is a wind chart. This is very unusual. She's cut it in half. A mother could leave anything. She could leave half a medal, half a coin, half a playing card, a piece of material. I mean, they're endless things.
Would it have their name on? How would they know that? They would come back with their half.
Yeah, they'd come back with their half. Now, here we come right to the end of their life. Here we have the death register. So we've got the beginning, the end, and I'm trying to fit in what goes in the middle. So I'm piecing together all the threads of their lives. Then, what interests me, how does Vivaldi tie into the Pietà? On a very basic level, he was a neighbour. I mean, he was born just up the road.
It's a big square, isn't it? Huge square.
It is quite large.
I don't know which church this is, but it's obviously his parish church. If it was here when he was a boy, and I imagine it was. St. Giovanni Battista.
Here we go.
Aha, yes. Antonio Vivaldi, look. Called Red Priest.
Il prete rosso.
Was it just someone nato in parrocchia, 4th of March 1678, yeah? He was baptised in this church, in questa chiesa. Yeah. Vivaldi was born and brought up in this square or campo, which is literally 2 minutes walk away from the Pietà. He must have played here throughout his childhood.
His father, Giovanni, was a professional violinist who played in the Doge's Chapel at St. Mark's Square. He also taught at one of the ospedali.
Giovanni Battista Vivaldi had red hair, and so did his son. Antonio started training for the priesthood when he was 15 years of age, and he was known as Il Prete Rosso, the Red Priest, because of the colour of his hair.
Vivaldi trained as a priest for 10 years, but after only 3 years of being ordained, he found himself unable to continue saying Mass on account of bad health. His own description was a tightness of the chest, which led many people to believe that he was a severe asthmatic. In 1703, he was hired as a violin teacher at the Pietà, where he worked on and off for 36 years until 1740, the year before he died.
Vivaldi's best known today for his Four Seasons, his concertos for violin and string orchestra. But in fact, these were only 4 of nearly 500 concertos that Vivaldi wrote, many of them for the girls at the Pietà. There's an old joke that says Vivaldi wrote one concerto and rewrote it 500 times. But this is a shame because Vivaldi was often very experimental in his music and used many unusual instruments and techniques. One of these was scordatura, which is a means of retuning the strings to allow different combinations of notes to be played. Vivaldi's position at the Pietà gave him an ideal opportunity to experiment with using different combinations of instruments. He wrote several concertos for small groups of soloists plus orchestra, which gave each of the girls a chance to shine. He wrote 27 cello concertos, several of which were for Teresa, one of the girls at the Pietà, who was obviously a fantastic cellist. He also wrote 9 sonatas for the cello, which is still popular today with both amateur and professional players.
Richard's our very own Vivaldi. He's a real expert in women's voices, and he's been running the Oxford Girls' Choir for 22 years. Apparently, a long time ago, he used to have red hair, just like Vivaldi.
The other thing, ladies, just general points, really. Don't hold the vibrato off, okay? This is Italian music. I really don't want the sound you to turn back into an English choir. If you want to let the voice go, let it go a bit.
This is new territory for all of us. We're only just beginning to discover what is possible. And so with Micky's help, I intend to carry this project forward to the future. I wanted to get people together to practice the music, to understand the context of the music, and to be unafraid to put their own personality into what they were doing. If we listen to Dixit Dominus, for example, which is one of the Vesper Psalms, we do hear a certain brilliance and a certain vibrancy of sound, which you would not get with a typical English choir. It's very easy to say Vivaldi is a rather dull composer. If we just think of Vivaldi in the concert hall, perhaps with the concertos played faster than Vivaldi would have expected them to be played, the music can just become flashy. But when we perform the sacred music in a sort of sacred context, in the space, with the acoustic of the Pietà laid out in the same way as Vivaldi would have known it, this music took on a sort of spiritual depth.
One of Micky's great achievements has been to unearth the names and characters of women from the Pietà. Her painstaking detective work has so far revealed 140 women who studied under Vivaldi. Famous musicians like Anna Maria the violinist, Apollonia the singer, and characters with names like Chiara, Meneghina, Samaritana and Pellegrina. Slowly, she's piecing together tiny details of their lives to give a sense of the personalities for whom Vivaldi composed.
What's so incredible about his sacred music is that there's so many stratas in it, because he obviously writes for the individual. He knows their character so well.
How were the musicians chosen as opposed to the non-musicians? Yeah.
You see, at any one time there are about 60 musicians. Now let's take a very simple case of Pellegrina, for instance. She started to play the bass. Then she was taught the violin, and she became Pellegrina da violin, and then she became Pellegrina da oboe. Almost all the oboe parts are written by Vivaldi for her.
Micky, did they generally live to a ripe old age?
They did, because, I mean, dear old Anzoletta, I mean, she was still playing the violin when she was 70. Pellegrina played the oboe when she was 62, but after that she played the violin to the age of 77. Do you know why? Because she didn't have any teeth. Well, I asked one of the orchestra, you know, the nice girl that played the oboe, I said, can you play the oboe without any teeth? And she said, no. These women, they were real tough cookies. They were fabulous. And they worked so hard. Anna Maria played the cello, the theorbo, the mandolin, the lute, the harpsichord, the oboe, it goes on forever. Apollonia, on the other hand, who was a soprano, she's one of the very few that didn't play an instrument.
Was there a reason, does it say?
I think she was such a brilliant singer that probably Vivaldi didn't let her do anything else. Someone like Anna Maria or Apollonia became superstars. They were known all over Europe.
Look, here, leading the way, like the leader of her troops, comes Anna Maria, the incarnation of goodness and beauty. She plays the violin in such a way that anyone hearing her is transported to paradise. She is beautiful. She has fair hair, rosy cheeks, a snow-white breast, fiery eyes, and noble features.
Stay over there.
Okay.
You mustn't look.
Micky invited Nadia, the leader of our orchestra, to the Venice Conservatoire to look at an extraordinary collection of manuscripts known as the Anna Maria Notebook.
You open it.
Gosh, that's amazing. So there are loads of concertos in here.
Oh yeah, go on.
And
go.
all written for her. And they don't look easy.
No. Anna Maria was born in 1696, and when she was 16, Vivaldi bought her a violin. He bought one for her and one for Bernardina at the same time. And he paid 20 ducats for her violin and 12 for Bernardina's. 20 ducats was more than 3 months' pay for him.
Yeah.
And she was only 16 at the time. And then, you know, she was a megastar. People used to come from far and wide to hear her. But, I mean, Nadia, looking at this, you can tell what sort of player she must have been.
Yeah, it's lots of double stops and very virtuoso.
What is double stopping?
Well, it's basically when you play two notes on two different strings.
Oh, I see.
Or you play chords or stuff. Like these are like all two voices basically.
Oh, I see.
And you play it at the same time. But the violin originally was only a melody instrument.
Oh, I see.
Only the very best.
Oh, I see.
It was very hard. I mean, still it's hard to play, but it's more common now.
You can tell from this
that she must have been an amazing player.
Yeah.
Definitely. Yeah.
Well, come on, you'll have to learn these.
I'd love to.
Obviously, what turns Micky on and what caught everyone's imagination were the characters. When you're performing the music that was written for them and staying in the rooms where they lived, you can't help developing an empathy with these women.
the choir, they would have grown up together as babies, all of them, wouldn't they? The orchestra and the choir, they would have been family. That was the only
There'd have
family
been a natural
they had.
mother-daughter relationships between the girls, I'm sure, and the older women.
But with us actually staying in the dormitories as well, you know, it's quite different, isn't it? Actually sharing room with people, you know.
You regress, don't you?
It's reverted, yeah. Well, the other night when we tried to escape.
We wanted a drink. Did you not? Said no. We crept down the stairs in the dark, and we ended up in the children's enclosed playground.
And you came through into. So we came back up and we got Anna to be a decoy.
So sheepish.
No, Anna distracted Richard whilst the other two. We escaped out Marsala.
Oh, excellent.
But were there any rebels? Were there some that escaped?
Oh my God, was there? One of them, Santina, the one who was fat and spotty, she concocted a plan to get out to go and meet her man. And she took two of her pals, who were not the musicians, they were the figli di comune, Elena and Marina. And Elena was going to distract the doorkeeper while Marina pushed Santina out. When Santina came back, of course she got into terrible trouble. Elena got 2 months in prison. Marina got 6 months. 6 months in prison.
In a prison?
They had a prison here.
Yeah. In the Pietà?
In the Pietà. Santina got 2 months in prison, but when they found out she was pregnant, they wouldn't allow her out until her boyfriend came to apologise to the governors. Right.
And then she had to leave, did she?
Oh, she was out immediately, and they were married the same day. She was a super rebel because after they left to marry, they were not allowed to perform music outside, but she did.
I was going to ask you.
She was an opera singer.
Oh, wonderful.
And there's this lovely cartoon of her. That's why I know that she's fat and spotty.
Pizza!
Micky, can you just direct that over here?
What note do we start on?
No. Sorry.
No. Hang on, we've got a tenor.
Woohoo!
And there's a bass coming. But my music's in the church.
Musicologists and historians have wondered for years about how Vivaldi's music was performed in the Pietà. In particular, who sung tenor and bass parts. Nobody could believe that women were capable of singing such a low range, despite the fact that in the Pietà archive there was a woman named Anna del Basso.
Aha, here she is. Bassi. Bassa? Bassa.
Basso.
Bassa, you're a girl. You're a girl. Donna Bonam.
Oh, that.
For a long time, the common assumption was that men must have been drafted in to fill those parts, but our choir is living proof that the women of the Pietà were perfectly capable of managing on their own.
The more I looked at Vivaldi's music in conjunction with Micky's research, the more I thought that her hunch that this was performed entirely by a choir of women was correct. Lots of people have said, you know, there couldn't have been women singing bass. The bass parts were played on cellos and double basses. There were no women singing bass. Or they had men singing bass who were hidden or were members of staff, you know, who took a sort of minor role in the operation. Or they said, well, actually, the bass part was transposed up an octave, which is plausible. But the clincher for us was Micky's research that the bass part was actually sung at pitch by one named person called Anna del Basso. There is also another woman who we can't quite identify who we think was a bass. I started looking around for women who could sing low. I was sure that there were such people. We tried 2 or 3 people, and then we met Margaret Jackson Roberts, who's got a very deep and powerful voice. We were rehearsing Vivaldi Gloria, and and there's a movement that went bom 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 at the end, and she said to me in the middle of rehearsal, "Would you like a bottomy?" And she sang bom bom, and I can't sing the bottomy. It's that note.
The joys of singing bass are you feel you're the foundation of the choir. We really matter, especially this pioneering venture to prove that women can and do and did sing bass, because that's an important point to prove without being in any way peculiar, except that they can sing low notes. And giving the foundation to the harmony is very important, so that people, and they say they can hear us, and it gives confidence to the rest of the choir. We're not men, of course. We produce our own particular timbre, as I suppose female tenors do.
Personally, I think it's very convincing. After half an hour of singing with our choir in the Pietà, it seemed as if this is how it should be done, and there's no reason to think that anyone should do it any other way. I think it's a bit like going to Venice and seeing the canals, and after half an hour you can't imagine why any town has got roads. And it's the same with Vivaldi's music. One can't imagine why men would have been needed.
It's something you have to rise to, because it's such a new venture. You feel you want to give more than of your best. You want to surpass yourself, both musically and to prove a point to the doubters. And there are people out there, and I've had it happen to me, who will say, "You're a freak voice."
A case in point where we hear the low voices is the Gloria Patri of the Dixit Dominus, the penultimate movement, which is a trio for bass, tenor and alto, and we hear them coming in that order. And here we clearly hear the sonority of the low voices, and that's the closest I think we get to solo writing for bass. Gloria Patri et Filio et Spiritus Sancto. Gloria Patri et Filio et Spiritus Sancto et Spiritus Sancto. Gloria Patri, Gloria Patri, Patri et Filio et Spiritus Sancto. Et Spiritus
We're in the State Archives now of Venice, and this is where I do my research on Vivaldi and the Pietà and the girls. This archive is one of the most important in Italy. You don't think in documents how many documents there are. You think in kilometres. There are 78 kilometres of shelving here. You don't know what you're going to find in any given busta, as we call it here, file. There are more than 1,000 busta to look at of the Pietà. That could take you a lifetime in itself.
Nothing makes Micky look as happy as when she's got her hands on a pile of dusty old manuscripts.
This is a document about Julia Organista, and here is the baptismal certificate of this girl who was born on the 17th of July 1790 here. This is wonderful, wonderful. The first new information I found on Vivaldi was when he sold a book of sonatas in 1712 for the Elector of Saxony's coming to the Pietà for a concert. And the emotion of that was tremendous, to find something new on Vivaldi, but it was also a very strange sensation, because your first reaction is to think, oh yes, I must look that up. And then you think, well, I can't, because I've just found it. Nobody knows, no one has ever seen that piece of information on Vivaldi. It's a bit like being in the jungle and you've suddenly found a new plant or bird or butterfly or something.
Micky is currently preparing a book of her archival discoveries, featuring pages from this minute book of the Pietà.
Called the Notatorio, and it goes from 1733 to 1737. And when I was going through this page by page, the more I read it, the more I saw that they were going to employ someone as a master, but it doesn't say who. But I could smell him. I knew, here he is, he's lurking here somewhere. The thing is that although I could smell him, I had to prove it. And almost on the next page, here he is, now having wanted to re-employ Don Antonio Vivaldi as Maestro dei Concerti. I knew that my hunch had been right, that they've been talking about Vivaldi here.
Micky's hunch about these entries contradicts historians who have long believed that Vivaldi had a troubled relationship with the Pietà authorities.
But the important thing is that it also says that this person is extremely capable, but he's extremely well respected among the figli, that's the younger ones, the maestre, and the governors. It's the whole nature of the document that tells you how Vivaldi is valued at the Pietà.
This fabulous painting of Venice shows the old pink Pietà church. Shortly after Vivaldi's death, this church was knocked down and replaced with a much grander building.
It's very, very different from the old church, which we know from the picture was pink and
that's
plastered.
Right, and little, and yes, oh yes, very different. When they decided that they wanted a fresco on the wall, Tiepolo was then in Spain, and they waited for him to come back because they wanted him to do it.
Who's up in that picture?
As far as Vivaldi is concerned, you see the trumpeter, he's got a wing, there's a wing.
Yeah.
To the left of that, there's a chap looking up.
Oh, there are two faces, yes.
The face in the middle, I think that's Vivaldi.
Does he have red hair?
He does have red hair. It's only half a face, it's like a memory. He's looking down on all these singers.
An important part of Micky's ongoing research with our choir is working out how the music was performed. In Vivaldi's era, choirs were placed in the specially constructed cantoria, or singers' balconies, high up around the edge of the church, and acoustically they would have produced an immense great echoey quadraphonic sound, very different to the typical English choral effect.
It's such a different view from up here.
However, getting it right turns out to be quite a challenge, and it doesn't seem to be helped by modern technology.
We're watching little Richard on a machine who's going to conduct us.
Because the sight lines are rather difficult, we're all cooping round this monitor here to try and see if
Richard.
we can... Hey, bravo, there he is.
Point at him again.
Yes, voila.
The first sopranos are in the northeast quarter gallery. The second soprano is in the southeast quarter gallery. The band is split from two sides in the two organ galleries, with the bass singers with the bass instruments, and in the northwest quarter gallery are the altos, and in the southwest are the tenors.
Vivaldi never actually came into this building. He saw the drawings for it, he was involved in the planning of it, and had it in mind. I think this particular space he had in mind for the acoustic values, which are extraordinary. I mean, they give us ensemble problems, but the sound is amazing. When you're down on the floor and you hear choirs singing in the galleries, it sounds fabulous.
The problem for us, of course, was that we had to do something that was more difficult than what Vivaldi himself did, in that we had a bigger space. There's 60 feet from side to side, a huge acoustic. It's rather like being under the dome of St Paul's Cathedral. You get tremendous echo. It goes on for 8 or 9 seconds. It's work in progress as far as I'm concerned. I want to go further with this. I want to do more experiments.
In order to fully understand Vivaldi's music at the Pietà, you have to place it in context with the rest of his work, the other side of his life.
At the age of about 38, Vivaldi started to write opera. Of the 20 or more operas he composed for Venice, 18 were premiered at the Teatro San Angelo, which used to stand here. He had built up a considerable reputation as a composer, but he must have realised that he was never going to become financially stable from his earnings at the Pietà, or even from the sales of his concertos. Venice was the cradle of opera, and in those days it was a highly popular, glamorous and brutally commercial art form. Father Antonio quickly became a huge success.
Milites, uc venite, surgite osservi, ex cubi et non dormite, omnes perdite sumis, Betulio missa, et Holofernes extincto.
It was opera that brought Vivaldi money and fame in his own lifetime. The Sant'Angelo Theatre was only 20 minutes' walk from the Pietà, but the glamorous, decadent and disreputable world of the opera must have seemed like another planet to the Pietà women, who would have been forbidden from going anywhere near such a place.
The opera theatre was one of the main industries in Venice, because it is not true that Venice had only a commercial tradition, but in the 18th century Venice had a touristical activity which was very important, very rich, and it was the main reason why so many people from abroad came to Venice. They wanted to come here and see all the plays, all the operas, and to be in this golden world of the opera, which can be compared to Hollywood.
The musicians of the Pietà were not the only women in Vivaldi's life. We know that in 1718 he met a young opera singer, half his own age, called Anna Giro. Anna subsequently became his travelling companion and the favoured soprano for his operas.
Anna Giro was a good singer, but she was said to be more than a singer, a good actress, and she had a lot of success too. And she had also this relationship with Vivaldi, but we have no evidence that we were lovers.
Their relationship was certainly a subject of rumour, but in a letter responding to an accusing cardinal, Vivaldi vigorously denies any impropriety, and no wonder, he'd have been in serious trouble. But for the women of the Pietà who worked with Vivaldi, there must at least have been a curiosity about this other operatic side of his life.
It was perhaps partly to satisfy this curiosity that Vivaldi wrote 2 or 3 oratorios, music dramas which were performed and maybe even acted by the Pietà musicians. This piece, Judita Triumphans, the only one to survive, bears a strong similarity to the works he wrote for the theatre.
You've got a simplicity here, a spirituality that I'm sure you didn't have in opera life, because the opera was all commercial. Okay, the opera musicians were good, but there was a different spirit here.
And presumably they had never been to the opera.
Exactly, and do you know, I wouldn't be at all surprised that if he felt that. So he put sort of operatic writing into the sacred music so that they could experience this, but in giving glory to God at the same time.
Some people said that maybe this institute should have been closed down because it no longer carried out the job it had been set up to do. So close it or change it, that was the question. Now we have reorganized our services in a thoroughly modern way in order to meet the social needs of today. We have 5 different communities caring for children and helping repair families in crisis. At the moment, we're looking into a new, very delicate service, the setting up of a helpline to help with certain cases which have been causing a lot of problems recently. That is, extreme cases where children are actually thrown away into rubbish bins. Unfortunately, it is a problem that we have today in Italy. Venice can be saved in many ways, definitely by saving its monuments, its things. But it is saved also by saving the spirit of some institutions that have intertwined their history with the history of the city of Venice. The Pietà has been one such important institution in the history of this city.
Can I tell you one more thing? Now, you see Nancy Jane these. This is where our figli are buried. So Maria Bolognese is under here.
They buried them under the church floor?
Oh yeah. They're all under here. Anna Maria's under here. I found a lovely document about the burial service, that they had 6 candles round the coffin. It's rather nice to think that Anna Maria and Maria Bolognese, they're still here.
In 1740, Vivaldi left Venice for the last time, probably accompanied by Anna Giro. He was under a great deal of financial pressure and decided to head to Vienna, perhaps to oversee the production of one of his operas. On the 28th of July, 1741, he died of what was described as internal inflammation. He was given a simple burial the same day in the hospital cemetery.
The Pietà music tradition continued after Vivaldi, but 20 years after his death, Charles Burney, visiting Venice, commented that the Pietà was not what it had been musically. By 1820, the music was over. Until now, that is.
There are 3 phases in research. First, you're gaining knowledge. Second phase is you then begin to gain a profound understanding. The third phase is the most exciting. It's a sort, almost, you could call it the sort of spiritual phase. You understand so much that you can almost see what's happening. You suddenly think, yeah, that's what that means, and you can see it happening.